not in control of the process, no data, churn of people, always a gap basically to what needed to be done and what was actually there.
Welcome everybody. My name is Ramon van Aarle. Welcome at this third episode of the Brothers in Tax podcast. Ruben, welcome.
Hello, my name is Ruben.
And together we are
Brothers in Tax.
Brothers in Tax. We're back again. We're back again. Welcome again. We're going to tell you today what's happening with tax technology and our business endeavors. And boy, did we had a quite nice ride for the last 25 years, right?
Absolutely.
So the landscape of tax is changing rapidly, and we just took a big jump to go all in on tax technology. That's what we're going to talk about. But can you take us back to the start of Keeyns?
Yeah.
Just we discussed a little bit on
in the previous episode.
But
correct. Yeah, back in 2017, right? So. We saw this client case. We got actually 50% paid for it, and 50% was our own investment right to see whether we could build something which would last. But we also saw basically with friends who were running IT companies that technology and IT was taking over some of the work which was done by or people or Excel and other formats, basically, just to make life easier and more.
That's true. But you still could stay at Taxperience. We had IT tooling back then, and just fueled Taxperience with more IT and live happily ever after. But you didn't.
I think we did that a little bit, of course, also, but perhaps again a little bit too much entrepreneurial ship in our genes, and had to do a little bit the fade in, fade out, basically out of Taxperience, more into Keeyns, into the IT part of it. Perhaps we also wanted to do something different with our knowledge, right? We had also this interim company, so we seconded a lot of people, a lot of tax directors, a lot of tax managers with large multinationals, and in the end, we always heard the same things, right?
Yeah.
Not in control of the process, no data, churn of people.
That's true.
People left, people were sick, people were on maternity leave. Always a gap, basically, to what needed to be done and what was actually there.
Yeah. And the market wasn't really fighting that problem back then, right?
Not at all.
So
basically, advisory firms are built on hourly rates, right?
Yeah.
So the more hours, the better it is.
Yeah. So wasn't it scary to fuel the technology part, Keeyns, more during the Taxperience days, while it's a little bit of cannibalism, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you know the discussions we had at the partner group, right? So not everyone was always all in on the IT part and on the IT investments we had to make.
Yeah,
I think we also highly underestimated how much work it in the end was, and how to build again a company, a tax technology company, compared to basically what we knew already, building an advisory firm.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's true. You have to have a solid backbone, right? You have to create a platform. You have to make lasagna instead of spaghetti. That's what we always learned from Johan, and still today. So that was, that was and is a very interesting ride. And can you take us back on the part when we more or less decided to go all in on building out Keeyns?
I think that was, let's say, 2.5, 3 years ago, right? We saw already a small shift. We got more clients. People liked the product. We're still a little bit scared to buy it from us, right? Brothers in tax, but what if they stop with their IT? Probably I have a problem, right? Because if we wouldn't fund it anymore, what's going to happen with my data?
That's true.
So that together, basically, with the wish of the partner group of Taxperience to, we knew we had to contribute more investments to the company in order to grow it, right? On the product, but also on the marketing side. So we decided to go for external capital. Yeah. So then I think that was really the shift that we said, okay, we kind of step out more or less out of the advisory role, and then more and more into the technology role, and start to build this IT company.
Yeah, that's true. That took quite some time to found the. We have two great investors at Keeyns today, right? But that I think that took us 9 months. Maybe?
I think almost a year.
A year, maybe, yeah. And then the negotiations, due diligence.
Yeah, we know the drill, right?
Yeah. So we
easy.
No, that was not easy. And if you look back at the product, can you pinpoint a year or when it was really suitable for the clients? Because we had the discussions back then, but they say, no, we need this and that. Was that, or is that difficult to say?
I think in the previous episode we also mentioned that don't wait for the ready Ferrari, right? So, but perhaps we launched really early, and the expectation of the buyer group was much more than we actually could deliver, right?
Yeah.
So I think actually when the investors came in two and a half years ago, the product was really an MVP, a minimal viable product.
Yeah.
Where, let's say, we get enough enthusiasm from the buyer group, from the tax departments, to start to use it. And if you see how it was back then compared to what it is today, of course, it's a huge change.
Huge difference. But that's so different than the tax advisory practice, right? So people have a problem. You are a tax lawyer. You have a meeting. You solve.
You solve a problem.
You solve a problem.
Send an invoice.
You send an invoice, and they have another problem next month, right? Instead of making software from scratch, and then basically the clients decide when your product is market ready, right? So there was
absolutely that's nice that you mentioned that indeed, because it's not us who decide whether the product is good enough. It's the client who decides whether they buy or not buy, and that says something whether the product is good enough or not good enough. Yeah. And I very often compare it, as you know, with let's say LinkedIn 20 years ago or 25 years ago.
It looked horrible back then.
Exactly.
Yeah. And sorry for LinkedIn, but yeah.
And look today, right? It's extremely powerful platform. But of course, it looks totally different today compared to 20 years ago.
I like that reference, but we still used it 20 years ago and it worked, right? And they build it out, and now it's basically your business library, right? If you have to catch somebody, probably LinkedIn will be the best.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good one. So you have to be persistent in your way of working, building out a software company, because we never did, right?
No, we never did. But of course, we saw with clients, with friends who had, let's say, software companies, who had SaaS companies, how it actually could work, right? So we had an idea, but then every industry, again, is different.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we had to face basically the lengthy sales cycle, right, of a enterprise software solution. Yeah. And we did not have any experience with that, right?
No.
So it's...
No, but we're
new ball game.
We're building that out fast for years now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you compare your previous lives, right? So being a tax lawyer, working with Big Four, then building out Taxperience, and if you have to compare that with running a SaaS company, a software company, what are the key takeaways? What can you tell the audience?
I think it's a totally different ball game. So in an advisory company, everyone is, let's say, 80% is advisor. Have the same background, same study, same way of thinking or expertise, right?
It's true.
If you look in the experience. So also discussions are very often very technical about tax itself and not per se on how you run a company. Where, let's say, with Keeyns, it's totally different ball game. As we need marketing. We're doing a podcast, right? Who would
Never did it before.
Never did it before. So who would have thought about that? We need market. So in marketing team, we have UX people. We have front end, back end developers, AI developers,
Customer success.
We have finance people,
management team,
sales people. Then we're
10 nationalities.
10 nationalities, 5 countries. So it's we have different kind of problems. I wouldn't say, but let's say challenges, discussions. But I like it. It's also learning again in a new business where we have, let's say, 25 years brothers in tax, right? So we do have a lot of knowledge about tax, but we use our knowledge in a different manner, building out a different company. That's I really like that. I truly enjoy it.
Yeah, me too. No, but it's totally different. I fully agree. So, what's easier, building out Taxperience or building out Keeyns?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question as well. I think in the end, let's say, scaling a service company, an advisory company, it's taking longer. It's easier to get clients, right?
Yeah, small task, do it, invoice.
So you're very soon in the money, and let's say with Keeyns, it's a much longer journey than I think both of us expected. But I think the growth scenario, because once we have a client and we have a happy customer, they stay, we get mouth-to-mouth advertisement, we get more clients,
more users.
So in the end, I think the recurring model of a SaaS company obviously is nice, but it takes much longer to build.
Yeah, and can you see, if you look because we have clients all over the world, is there a difference in the buying group or the talks or the? So if you compare Middle East with Europe and with the US, do you see any differences, or is it because tax covers is a worldwide thing, right?
Right. Yeah, it's now we see that, let's say, the 50% of our pipeline is US, so there is apparently a high adoption in the US of IT solutions. Perhaps a little bit more open-minded for IT? Question mark. Of course, in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, we say because it's all tax is relatively new, so our story is there to. Why would you do what we did in Europe and the US, right?
Don't use Excel, right? We have it here for 40 years, but you might as well can.
You can also skip that, right? They don't have landlines in Africa. They have only mobiles, right? So they pay with mobiles. There are no ATMs, or not as many as we are used to. So why would you do exactly the same if technology is already there? And then I must say, in Europe, it's now also shifting. We get more and more, if we go to the events, the seminars, more and more willingness to adopt IT.
Yeah, that's. I think you and me touched upon that on a previous episode. But I think really starting January 1st, 2026, somebody pushed a button, because people are more willing to look into it. It's really excited and don't know really what's happening.
They have to do something. That's a little bit. And what is then the question mark? But we also see it, right? So the landscape is getting bigger and bigger of tax technology solutions.
No, I agree. You feel it at the summits as well, right? If you look two years back, our first summit, I think, was in Berlin.
Yeah.
If you compare that to the last one in Frankfurt.
True.
Totally different. So,
and as you know, we tried in Prague in the beginning.
For years.
And then it was 90% was about jurisprudence and new legislation in countries and kind of tax schemes. And now we go to these summits, and it's, I would say,
50-50.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, it's 50-50. Oh, that's interesting. So then let's look into the future. So if we have, we've seen this change in only 2 years. What will happen in the next, let's say, 20 years? What do you think?
Yeah, I think tax without technology is unthinkable anymore. I think a lot of the admin work, what tax advisors are doing, also the tax advisors we always employed at Taxperience, I think 60-70% of the work going into a file, dig for information, search for it, make an analysis out of it. Yeah, basically this is past history, right? So the resources will be used differently, I think. There are also less people in tax, so it's good there is technology.
Yeah, we need it.
So there's going to be a huge change. I foresee the coming years. Also, tax authorities, right? So, just as a fun fact, perhaps, I believe 4 or 5 years ago they had 8 tax advisors in UAE. Today they have 800, and they foresee 5,000 within the next 2 years.
Wow.
So that says something about, let's say, the region adopting a tax.
Yeah.
But also those people have to do something, and they use a lot of AI. They use a lot of technology. So probably a lot of tax questionnaires, tax audits are generated just by AI. So if you're a company and you want to counter those questions only with human hours, spending a lot of time, not the libraries anymore, but perhaps behind a laptop.
Yeah.
Perhaps you need technology also to counter the questions from the authorities, because they will generate just these questions.
Yeah, for sure. But there still will be Big Four and advisory firms, and there still will be tax teams
100%
internally, right?
100% for sure.
Why do you think so? Because can AI have the discussion on tax with the CFO and the CEO?
Well, we think not yet, right? So
No.
it's, I believe Microsoft is calling that ASI, artificial super intelligence. So that's basically weighing what a human being is doing, and what is good, what is bad, what is possible, what is not possible. So this kind of weighing will still be done, I think, by the advisors, but also by the in-house tax people, right? Who,
For sure.
Who have, let's say, the feeling with the business and know better what can and needs to be done.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's maybe the comparison with a plane, right? The plane can fly itself, but
Right.
we still want 1 or 2 people in the cockpit, right?
Exactly.
Maybe that's also
That if
what's
things
gonna
go
happen in
sour,
tax.
at least someone can steer it, right?
Someone can steer it. Yeah, that's true. But how do the juniors fresh from university become seniors, right? Because if AI can do the heavy lifting, what we did before in the library 25 years ago, how do you
So probably the pyramid model of the Big Four is perhaps a little bit outdated today, and we go more to a lawyer model where there is a very senior partner with 2 or 3 people to educate them. So if you're fresh from university, you do need, let's say, to get the experience, but where do you get it, right? So you need to read a lot, you need to see a lot, also for in-house people. So you need to gather somewhere your experience. And I'm curious to see how that will go the coming years.
Yeah, me too. So there will be a large change at the advisory firms, and maybe also at the internal tax departments. And hopefully people will get more open to include tax technology and tooling in their day-to-day work.
I think they have to, right?
They have
so there are companies who are not willing to pay anymore for people with less than 5 years experience because AI is doing their jobs. So I think advisory companies or let's say in-house tax departments who don't adopt, they will fall behind, and in the end they kill their own business. So
very interesting to see what we're gonna experience for the coming decades. But we live today,
We live
right?
today.
And time is precious, so it's already the end of this episode. I really want to thank you, Ruben, for
Very fast again.
Very fast again. It's getting faster and faster. Huh?
Unbelievable.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. My name was Ramon, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you very much, Ramon. My name was Ruben. Thank you, listeners, for listening to us, and
See you next time.
see you next time.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Before we end, a call to action to our viewers and listeners. Please let us know what you want Ruben and myself to discuss on the next episode, and we will do it. Thank